Welcome back, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. Donald Trump has threatened to raise tariffs on India substantially within 24 hours amid continued tensions over Indian purchases of Russian oil. India has remained staunch in its position of prioritising national stability and security. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that Hamas must be defeated for Israeli hostages to be freed. Meanwhile, the UN Humanitarian Office says aid in Gaza is still insufficient as Israel announces it is set to allow the gradual flow of goods into Gaza through local merchants. Ukrainian officials say that Russia has targeted a railway hub in the Kharkiv region with 34 Shahid drones after reports of civilian casualties in the country. It comes as Ukrainian strikes have reportedly led to fires at a power substation in Russia's Rostov region. Meanwhile, Sweden, Denmark and Norway have pledged $486 million to a NATO project funding US weapons to be sent to Ukraine. NATO chief Mark Rutte says he is grateful for the support amid continued offensives in the war between Russia and Ukraine. This comes as reports suggest that the EU is preparing sanctions for Russia over allegations that Beijing is supplying drones to Russia secretly. The alarms have been raised in Brussels over Chinese support for Russia amid its war against Ukraine. In an interview, US President Donald Trump has called Labour statistics antiquated and political. This comes after Trump fired the Bureau of Labour Statistics Commissioner over a jobs report that he called rigged. The US has condemned an order from Brazil's Supreme Court placing former President Jair Bolsonaro under house arrest. The right-wing ally of Donald Trump is standing trial over allegations that he plotted a coup to overturn the most recent presidential election. That he denies. And officials in Hong Kong have issued the highest level black weather warning as the region is hit with its heaviest rainfall since 1884. Major disruption has been caused with hospitals, clinics, schools and courts shut across the city. But we start this hour as US President Donald Trump has warned that he would very substantially raise tariffs on imports from India, potentially within the next 24 hours, citing New Delhi's continued purchase of Russian oil, a day after he announced on his social media platform Truth Social that he would be hiking duties on India. He has also said that upcoming tariffs on imported pharmaceuticals could go as high as 250% over the next 18 months, and added that he plans to unveil fresh duties on foreign semiconductors. Trump has said that India's high tariff rates on American goods remained a key sticking point in bilateral trade relations. Meanwhile, New Delhi has reportedly called the threat of additional tariffs unjustified and unreasonable, while the Kremlin responded strongly on Tuesday, labelling such US pressure tactics as illegitimate. Well, a big development coming from Donald Trump, a time frame being put on potential Indian tariffs. Joining us to discuss this big breaking news, Dr. Ajai, a former Secretary of Commerce and a senior economist who's joining us live from New Delhi. Dr. Dua, thank you for your time. It seems strange that we've got here after so many meetings that took place between US officials and Indian officials. Of course, J.D. Vance meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and at that point it seemed a deal was close. Then 25% tariffs, then questions about India purchasing Russian oil, and now Trump saying that tariffs on Indian exports could be raised substantially within 24 hours. How did we get here?
Thank you very much for having me on the show. I think India has probably, I'm using the word probably very consciously, has rubbed President Trump rubbed him on a couple of issues. One, of course, has been denying that he had a role to play in bringing the ceasefire between India and Pakistan in their conflict in the month of May. Second, he also thinks that India has been actually buying far too much from Russia, defense equipment as well as oil. But if you look at it, these are not factually kind of justifiable. If we bought oil from Russia after the US sanctions had been imposed, we had consulted the United States. It wasn't done at their back. The US was convinced after considerable persuasion that yes, it might actually help the rest of the world, including the European Union and the US, if some oil was bought by Russia, by India. It will keep the prices, international prices, more stable than otherwise. Otherwise, the Gulf countries and to some extent the countries of Latin America would have benefited from it. They're also, if you let's recall, it wasn't Russia alone. Iran as well as Venezuela. We had already been the world had been told they don't buy from there as well. So you were taking away a lot of oil from the international market by the US sanctions. So we didn't pay for it in dollars. Certainly, the dollar trade is controlled by the US banking institutions and by the US administration. The payments made by us have been in different currencies, including arranging, rubles, somewhere we have paid it in yens, those kind of currencies. And then to accuse India of buying defense items from Russia. And we've been doing that for 50 odd years, ever since the 62 war between India and China. Soon after that, we started to return to Russia, and we've been buying that 63 years ago. It's not today. And whatever items we bought are absolutely known to the US. The US has allowed, for instance, AVAX. The US allowed us. It didn't like it, but it did go along with us. And we didn't buy it just the other day. It's been there for quite some time. So now to say that we are financing the killing of terrorists, sorry, the killing
Sorry,
of
Dr. Dua, I want to interject because I'm conscious of how much time we have left. There are a couple of more really important points that I want to touch on. Firstly, Donald Trump talking about India fueling the Russian war machine. Of course, he's mentioned that China are also a country that purchase Russian oil. That's aside from other Russian exports that the US and the EU still purchase. Why is Donald Trump particularly focusing on India and not looking at China for these sanctions within 24 hours?
This is what I fail to understand, that what is new, except our contradicting him on mediation in bringing the ceasefire with Pakistan, which we talked about earlier. I don't think any of the developments for which India is being accused now, and hence going to attract penalties from the US, penalties which he had earlier talked of might be 500% and not probably a little less, but yet very substantive. It is something got as much to do with President Putin not listening to the United States President about the Ukraine war, stopping the Ukraine war. Earlier, see, on the Ukraine issue itself, that President Trump has wavered during the 6 months that he's been in power. Support Ukraine, not support Ukraine, now again start supporting. I'm hoping that President's Special Envoy, Mr. Witkoff, who has probably reached Moscow today and who's likely to be given an audience by the President,
Yes.
Putin, will be able to prevail upon the President or President Putin that, look, let's not talk about this deadline of 8th of 12 days. That's the 8th of August. By 8th of August, you should stop the war, or we will do this or that. See, sending two
Dr.
nuclear...
Dua, I really am conscious
Yeah.
of time and sorry to interject once again. I just want some insight from you, of course, because of your expertise. If higher tariffs come in, what will they affect? Is it across the board or will it be on specific sectors?
I think it's going to affect half of India's exports, about half of India's exports of currently at about $86 billion, because the other 45 or so stand exempted under Section 232, for which investigations have been ordered by President Trump himself to look at the semiconductor conductor contents and the implications for the US on the exports and the imports of those items. So for the time being, probably till the investigation is over, we are expecting that he won't levy any tariffs. But today he has said next week there might be a small tariff on that. No, there might be a tariff and pharmaceutical, which protects the US government, US insurance companies, which protects the US citizens by getting cheap generic medicines from China and India. He wishes to tax those as well. I think sum total of all that is happening and these tariffs is going to result in the US customer being the most affected party, because everything, tariffs on all the 50-odd countries are going to be ultimately paid by them.
Yes, Dr. Dua, we are unfortunately out of time, but thank you ever so much for your insight. Of course, this big breaking news is something we will continue to cover here on NewsX World. But moving to the Middle East now, as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that Israel must complete the defeat of Hamas to free the hostages held in Gaza. His comments come a day after reports suggested the Israeli military could occupy the entire territory. Despite Israel's efforts to allow humanitarian aid and tactical pauses for UN convoys, the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reported that aid entering Gaza remains far insufficient. The UN also stated that humanitarian convoys continue to face dangerous obstacles along routes approved by Israeli authorities. Let's now listen to the Israeli Prime Minister.
וההישגים האלה כמובן הם מאחורינו, אבל עדיין יש צורך להשלים את תבוסת האויב בעזה, לשחרר את כל חטופינו, להבטיח שעזה לא תהווה יותר איום על ישראל. אנחנו לא מוותרים על אף אחת מהמשימות הללו, ואנחנו נעשה את זה יחד באמצעות ההקרבה הגדולה של הלוחמים שלנו והלוחמות שלנו.
Joining us to discuss these comments is Yossi Kupawasa, an Israeli intelligence and security expert live from Tel Aviv. Yossi, as always, thank you for joining us. Do these comments from Benjamin Netanyahu talking about the complete defeats of Hamas signal the end to any chance of a ceasefire immediately?
Well, Hamas refused to accept a ceasefire deal that would also see the release of some of the hostages. And therefore, we have to consider other options, and because we are not going to give up on releasing the hostages, all of the hostages, and we are not going to give up on removing Hamas from power in Gaza, so that Gaza would not be a launching pad for future attacks against Israel. And we have to move towards putting more pressure on Hamas, hoping that they will change their mind about the deal. And if not, we shall have to take over Gaza by force and remove Hamas from power by force. And these are the options that are being considered by the government today and during the rest of the week. And we'll see what is the decisions they're going to make. They have to decide whether to go gradually, put more pressure, but not move in order to topple Hamas by force right now, or whether they should go directly towards removing Hamas by force immediately. That's the two options that they are considering. It's hard to say what's going to be chosen. The military prefers the second option, so it prefers the option of gradually moving towards putting more pressure on Hamas. And this is going to be, of course, consideration by the government when they discuss this matter with the military actually this afternoon.
Yossi, of course, military operations have continued since March and the breaking down of that first ceasefire. It's not led to any hostages being released, other than that US-Israeli hostage that was brokered by the United States. Is there an argument to be made amid protests from people in Israel that the military efforts are not going to lead to the release of hostages and could in fact put hostages at risk?
Yes, there is concern that if we move forward with more power, the fate of the hostages is going to be in danger. The situation of the hostages is terrible as it is. The Hamas just issued all kinds of clips of some of the hostages in which they look so terrible that it's really horrifying the way they treat the hostages. And so time is not on our side when it comes to the hostages survival. And we need to take action. So there is a hope that more pressure is going to change the Hamas mind, and they will be ready to do what they haven't been ready to do until now. I don't think this is going to work, because Hamas, for them to show readiness to a full deal, which will require them to give up their arms, is something that is beyond what you can expect from Hamas. This means that the 7th of October attack was a mistake, and that means that they will lose the strategic asset, which is the ruling over Gaza. So they are not going to be ready to go for such a deal unless we really decide to go and take over the entire Gaza Strip by force. And this is what the government understands, but the military is hesitant about it, because they know that if they do that, not only the fate of the hostages is going to be in danger, but it's going to require a lot of military force for a long time. Once we hold Gaza, then we'll have to take care of the Gazans and directly. And this is going to be a very big demand for Israel.
Yes,
So
Yossi, unfortunately we are out of time, but thank you ever so much for your insights and for joining us. We move on now to Europe. Russia has attacked the railway hub in Lozova, Kharkiv region, with at least 34 Shahid drones overnight, reportedly causing significant damage to the main train station and depot. That according to local officials. Governor Ole Snyhabov confirmed the deaths of 2 people, including a man who died on the spot and a woman who later died in hospital. 9 others were injured, including 2 children. The strikes only damaged civilian infrastructure, and emergency services are still working to extinguish fires at some locations. That again, according to reports. The attack left parts of the region without power and water. Let's now take a look at what Kharkiv's region governor has had to say.
34 шахеди по населеному пункту Лозова, приміщення вокзалу, тобто будівля сама вокзалу, плюс, відповідно, транспортне депо залізничне. 9 людей отримали поранення, 1 людина, чоловік загинув на місці, жінка загинула вже безпосередньо, померла в лікарні від отриманих травм. Руйнування виключно по цивільній інфраструктурі, удари виключно по цивільній інфраструктурі. По деяких локаціях ще підрозділи ДСНС ліквідовують фактично пожежі.
Well, joining us to discuss these reported strikes, retired Major General Gigi Dawedi, a defence analyst, joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us. We must acknowledge that these are reported from Ukraine, but deaths reported, injuries reported in Ukrainian regions. Is this a signal that peace is far from a reality in the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Absolutely, Joshua. Today, the Russian-Ukraine conflict is almost 3.5 years, and there's constant death and devastation. But ironically, peace doesn't appear to be on the horizon. And there are a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, I don't think President Putin is interested in any peace efforts, because he still is under delusion that possibly he can make more strategic gains, which has not happened. It is almost in this state of stalemate militarily for the last more than 2 years. While Putin does control, or Russia does control 20% of the Ukraine territory, but they have not been able to make any major gains, despite so much of effort as far militarily, and also they have been losing soldiers at a very, very high scale. So therefore, point is that at this stage, what only one can visualize, that Putin is not in mood to halt the war, which rightly he should do, because there's nothing very much being gained. And secondly, as for the diplomatic efforts are concerned. President Trump has given ultimatum at 8 August that war should stop, but I don't think Putin is going to oblige. So what I can see is that possibly President Putin is visualizing that he may make some gains in next 2-3 months, then the winters are going to set in, and possibly Ukrainian morale will go down, they'll give it up, but that's not going to happen. NATO has pledged support, and therefore Ukraine will fight on until some wisdom dawns on President Putin. I don't see any chance of peace happening anytime soon.
Major General, let's build on that NATO support. If you can stay with us, because we do have an announcement coming from Europe. And this comes as Sweden, Norway and Denmark have announced a combined contribution of 5 billion Norwegian crowns, equivalent to around $486 million, to a NATO-led initiative designed to supply Ukraine with US weapons. The three countries will fund a $500 million package of equipment and ammunition, including Patriot missiles, air defence systems and anti-tank munitions. Sweden's share of the package will be worth $275 million, with the Swedish Deputy Prime Minister Ebba Busch stressing the importance of continued supply of American defence materials that Europe cannot provide in sufficient quantities. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte praised the three Nordic countries for their swift action and support for Ukraine. Well, thank you for staying with us, Major General Gigi Dawedi. Let's look now at this announcement. Of course, Patriot defence systems, Ukraine say they are vital in stopping Russian aerial assaults like the one that's been reported that we just spoke about. How significant a win is this for Ukraine?
This is very, very important, because what Ukraine needs is air defense systems, because after all, the major attacks or the major offensive actions by the Russians are from the air. And until they have very strong air defense system, Ukraine will not be able to defend itself. So therefore, this aid and the weapon system like Patriot is very, very effective weapon system against the air. Therefore, I think it will help Ukraine to put up a effective air defense, which is very, very essential, because currently there are very little ground action that are going on. It's mostly aerial warfare. And in aerial warfare, you have to have both the strike capability and the defense capability. While Ukraine doesn't have very credible air force, they are attacking through the drones, but they need defense capability, and that will come through the air defense system, that is Patriot missile system. And my last point is, until they keep getting the supplies, Ukraine army cannot hold on. Therefore, this military aid, which is being promised by the NATO country, is very vital for Ukraine to hold on. So in the end, I can say the air defense system is very important in aerial warfare, and therefore I think Ukraine needs it, and it is the need of the hour, and only through supply the weapon system and air defense system can Ukraine hold on against the Russian aerial offensives. Joshua.
Yes, Major General Gigi Dawedi, thank you ever so much for taking the time to speak with us on both of those related Russia-Ukraine stories. We move on now, though, to North America, as President Donald Trump doubles down on claims that the Bureau of Labor Statistics had rigged jobs data during an interview to CBS. He continued to slam Erica McAntifer, the former head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, who he fired. He claimed that she rigged a poor job numbers report. Following this, the BLS clarified that the revisions came from additional data submissions and recalculation of seasonal adjustments, a common practice in its monthly employment estimates. The move has sparked warnings over data reliability in federal economic reporting. The BLS reported a gain of just 73,000 non-farm jobs in July and revised May and June job counts down by a combined 258,000, putting the three-month average at only 35,000. This is the slowest since April 2020. Well, joining us to discuss this development, Raymond Vickery, former US Assistant Secretary of Commerce, who's joining us live from Washington, DC. Raymond, thank you for joining us. We don't have too much longer, but can I get your opinion on how this is playing out? Trump continuing to talk about this jobs report he says is rigged. Firstly, do you think it is rigged? And secondly, is Trump digging himself a deeper hole here?
Well, thanks very much for having me, Joshua. No, this is not rigged. Dr. McAntifer is a very well-respected, nonpartisan head of this. This is quite a common practice to revise in the face of new data. What's happened is President Trump got a report he didn't like, and he's trying to create a different reality. This is nothing new for him. He does it continuously, and it's really a part of the falsification which has gotten him to power, and he wants to sustain it to keep it there. It's a very, very unsettling development because it's an attempt to change reality.
Does this go next? Where do you think that this discussion around data, specifically this jobs data, but also in general, will move? Do you think this is going to raise questions about Trump? And do you think it will see a shift in potential support for Donald Trump, given how public this has been?
I think it will shift support eventually. It will not on the MAGA base, where, as Trump has said, he could shoot somebody in Fifth Avenue and those people would stay with him. But the reality is that there are people who were on the margin, and they aren't going to like that. And Donald Trump is increasingly concerned about the midterms. He's trying to get redistricting in Texas to rig the election coming up. So this is not going to redound to his benefit. He's had his chief of Bureau of Labor Statistics who's chimed in and said that it's wrong. And it's widespread knowledge that this is just an attempt to falsify and create a reality favorable to President Trump.
Raymond Vickery, I wish we had longer to speak. Thank you ever so much, as always, for your unique insights. We will, of course, bring you all the updates from the American political sphere. But we do move on now as heavy rains hit Huizhou in southern China, triggering a level 2 flood emergency and closing several tourist sites. Chinese state-run broadcaster CCTV showed on Tuesday 4 rivers rose above warning levels, including the Dansu River, which exceeded the danger mark by 2.19 meters. More than 7,500 people were evacuated from low-lying areas, including the Huyang district, where roads were submerged. Emergency crews used dinghies to rescue stranded residents. Rain has been falling non-stop since Thursday, July the 31st, with over 156 millimeters recorded in 24 hours in Huyang alone. Flood barriers have been installed near bridges to stop river water from reaching urban zones. In Jiangmutu County, Dongguan City, heavy rain overwhelmed drainage systems, submerging roads and trapping vehicles and residents. Firefighters rescued people stranded in vehicles and shops, with floodwaters rising nearly to the rooftops. Authorities have raised the flood emergency response to level 2, with more than 100 counties and districts activating emergency protocols. Well, that is all that we have time for. We'll be back soon with more of your latest breaking international news.